I'll act very youthful and impish and foolish, like I'm a 30-year-old who just got his late-night show, but I want my physical appearance to be nothing less than horrifying. Conan said, the podcast was a total accident. I'm willing to try things. Somebody said, you should do a podcast. I made fun of the idea, but I said, all right, let's do a test one. I had a lot of fun. That just blossomed into something where, I just got to talk to Obama for an hour and 10 minutes. I had Obama on the TV show, but that's very different. There's an audience, there's music, there's let's take a break. It's not the same as being able to sit across a table from someone in a small room with a microphone and shoot the stuff and see where it goes. That's what I'm in search of, whatever the medium is. What's the format where I still get to be a kid? If there's one message you take away from this, it's that late night comedy has kept me childlike, but the trick is you have to keep changing it and keep looking for the next iteration, keep looking for the next format, and keep looking for the new outlet. My goal is just to stay a kid. It really is Peter Pan syndrome. I want to stay young and silly at heart, and the way to do that is you got to keep moving. I'm very grateful for 11 years at TBS, but I want to retain that foolishness. It might be the secret to my pompadour is that it only survives if I'm doing silly stuff that challenges me and makes me giddy. If I lose track of that, I'll have a very sad comb-over. Long episode today. Let's take another break. More with Conan O'Brien coming up. From The Hollywood Reporter, Conan O'Brien smoked weed on stage with Seth Rogen the other night. O'Brien admitted he wasn't sure what he plans to do during his downtime between the end of the TBS show tonight and his planned weekly variety series for HBO Max. Rogen said, I would suggest, this is going to be hilariously on brand, try smoking a lot of weed for a long time. Rogen noted that O'Brien seems like someone that doesn't smoke a lot of weed. O'Brien said, I don't smoke any weed, and that's not a judgment. I like my lucidity, but said he considers it a fine herb. Rogen quipped, if there was ever a sign that you don't smoke weed, it's that you just called it a fine herb. Seth Rogen pulled a joint from his suit jacket and held it out. The audience cheered. O'Brien said, this is how lame I am. For a second, I thought he brought a birthday candle. Rogen pulled out a lighter. O'Brien attempted to light the joint, was holding it the wrong way, and said, I really don't know what the F I'm doing. And then he passed it off to Rogen, who took a hit and then handed it to Andy Richter. Rogen said, I'll hold on to this for a while. And the Washington Post had a lengthy article about Conan O'Brien. They spoke to people who've been associated with Conan's career over the 30 years. Matt O'Brien, who's the head writer on Conan and no relation, he said, I'm not related to Conan. Just happen to have the same last name, but Conan likes to tell naive interns that I'm his cousin, and he had to hire me because he owed our Uncle Frank a favor. He tells them I've never worked in comedy before, and I used to sell lawnmowers door to door. They believe him. Robert Smeigel was a late-night writer. He's also the voice of Triumph, the insult comic dog. Smeigel said, Conan and I were good soldiers at Saturday Night Live, sneaking in some weird scenes, but always trying to serve the show's needs with accessible but hopefully smart ideas. When Conan got late night, we would finally have a playground for all our pent-up idiocy. We did topical interviews with celebrities by clutch cargoing them, using their publicity photos but having an actor's mouth provide the voice. The first interview was with President Clinton, whom I played as a carefree hillbilly, gleefully that he could say anything he wanted to at 12:30 in the morning when no one was watching. In rehearsal, I asked Conan to, quote, feed Clinton by holding up his mug to the photo while I loudly slurped his water. Pretty funny, but then Conan suggested I lap up the water with my tongue like a kitten. The Clinton bit was on our second show. Our premiere had gone very well, but this was our first clear home run, and lapping up the water was our first big applause break in a sketch. The little slice of stupidity that will always be my sweetest memory in show business, because it was two close friends breaking through in one moment and doing it together. Bob Odenkirk was also a writer for Late Night with Conan O'Brien. Bob said at SNL when I met him, Conan was a whirling, hand-wringing spitfire of comic riffs and nonsense. I figured normal people would be overwhelmed by this O'Brien fella if they ever saw him in his normal and everyday unhinged persona. Cut to a few years later, we were shooting hoops at Fairfax High School. Conan was a few days away from seeing a lineup of possible hosts for Late Night. Conan swears he wasn't thinking he could host, but he asked me, would you want to host? Now, this was not a realistic thing, so I think he was asking, what do you think of the challenge of that job? And for me, the answer was no, because I don't like talking to celebrities much. A week and a half later, after what sounds like an okay but uninspired evening of auditions, Conan did his test run of hosting. Gotta give it to Lorne Michaels for taking this crazy wild swing and supporting someone genuinely fresh. Conan impressed me with his energy and commitment, despite all the negativity of the reviews and general uncertainty of the audience that greeted the show those first few months. All these years later, he still has that energy. He loves the audience, and he's loony as a loony bird. And it all worked out great. Lucky us. Al Roker said the interesting thing about my relationship with Conan is that, and I believe this is true, I actually hold the record for most appearances on Conan O'Brien, and it wasn't because I was a vivacious and humorous guest or that I was just witty beyond belief. It was because I was there. At the time, I was not only doing the Today Show, but I was doing local news at WNBC, which is literally right across the hall. So whenever they had a guest drop out because of a scheduling or weather delays or anything, I would get called. They'd be like, oh, please, can you come? So I was always on the show. Max Weinberg, the Late Night and Tonight Show band leader, said the late, great Rodney Dangerfield made an appearance fairly early in my 16-year run. I learned a valuable lesson. The band leader must always know the last joke of a comic. Towards the end of his stand-up segment, as I was off camera perusing the next script segment, I suddenly heard a voice directed at me. That's your cue. I looked up at Rodney standing about 7 feet away from me, and he said, what? Play. He said fairly vigorously. He wanted what we call a chase. Play him across the floor to the desk. When the guest posterior hits the couch, you button it up. So I hit it. Legend that he was, Roddy didn't miss a beat. He turned to Conan in the audience and works my mistake into his act and said, I tell you, it's a story of my life. Even from a drummer, I get no respect. The audience roared. Bill Burr said, Conan and Andy, they have this old school thing. If you watch the old Johnny Carson shows, he never stepped on his guests. He knew if the guest was killing, then the show was killing. That's what I remember the most. If I was on a roll, I never ever remember getting interrupted by them. And I remember countless times Coney and Andy saving me if I started to dip. And Jordan Schlansky was an associate producer on Late Night, Tonight, and Conan, saying, the past 26 years have been an ongoing adventure with far too many extraordinary moments to effectively mention. Riding a bicycle through the American Museum of Natural History at midnight, sneaking a rubber dog puppet into Madison Square Garden, stopping New York City traffic on 3rd Avenue to crack a 10-foot bullwhip, witnessing so many legendary musical artists of the 1990s make their early TV appearances, looking out over Radio City Music Hall from a 9th floor window in 30 Rockefeller Plaza. I treasure all of it and remain forever grateful to these shows and our incomparable host. Tonight is the last episode of Conan. Your guest is Jack Black. That's your comedy news for today. Follow this show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, along with today, normal episode tomorrow. See you then.